All right. So really quickly, I'm just going to pass it over to you, Vincent. Everyone, this is Vincent Phamvan. He is the head of growth at Simplr.ai. I already told you a little bit about Simplr in the opening lines. Today, he is going to tell us how to use AI to automate our customer service. Vincent, take it away.
Hey, I feel like we just had such a great session with Phil about how to use AI to scale customer service. Always awesome to take a look at how to be able to use customer service, not just as a post-sale support item, but really taking a look at how to increase sales, because that's what we're all interested in. You know, the interesting thing, I mean, Derek, how much would you say stores are spending today in acquisition costs?
Oh, I mean, it's the number one spend, right? It's 33% of revenue probably, or something like that.
Yeah, 33% of revenue and average conversion rates are sitting at
1%, 1 to 2,
1%.
maybe.
Yeah, no, what I love about the heart of what Phil was talking about in that session is what's happening to the rest of those customers, and what are you doing to be able to dedicate the resources that you have, the tools, the scripting, the AI, the articles, and in some instances, you yourself or your support team to be able to convert the rest of those customers. You know, so many stores are spending so much money getting traffic to websites that those raising ad costs are only going up. That's why if you open up your mailbox today, you're seeing direct mail from companies like Casper. You're seeing direct mail from folks like Warby Parker as they're diversifying their ad spend, because all of us are facing the exact same rising ad spend through the digital acquisition channels. So we're talking today about customer service and how to scale your business, but really talking about not necessarily scaling customer service, but being able to scale sales for your store. And so these are the stats that really shocked me. 50% of US consumers abandoned a purchase due to a poor service experience. And this isn't talking about consumers who are abandoning or leaving a brand after having a customer service experience after purchasing an order. This is talking about part of the reason why they're just not making a purchase on a store potentially is because they're reaching out in places like social media, like Phil was mentioning, or they're reaching out through live chat and there's not somebody available fast enough, or they're reaching out through email and they just haven't had a great experience. So the question is where are these folks going? And unfortunately, so many stores have spent so much money getting a customer to a web page only to see them bounce, and they're going straight over to a competitor. And many of us are in really fragmented markets where there's a lot of competitors out there, oftentimes competing on price on similar products. And so this is a tough way to be able to invest in customer acquisition only to have something like a bad experience sending them somewhere else. So the question that I had when I first saw these first two stats is, hey, where are these customers going, and how long would it take to be able to win them back? And high income customers, so the customers who are going to have the largest AOVs, on average, they won't give a brand another chance for 3 years. 3 years is a really long time to be able to wait for somebody to come back. And this makes sense. I've had experiences myself where I've shopped at stores, and after having a bad experience, the reality is there's plenty of options out there for other places where I can choose to bring my business. And so definitely I could see a world where I could see this to be true, where 79% of folks won't shop at a store again after having a bad experience for 3 years. So how do stores get an edge early on? So I have a podcast that's called the Retail E-Commerce Briefing. It's on iTunes if you search for it. It's on Stitcher. It's on Google Play, everywhere where you would listen to podcasts. And so I've talked to a lot of founders of stores that are somewhere between $10 and $100 million. And I asked them about doing customer service in the early days. And what was really striking to me is most of them don't refer to it as customer service. They just talk about having relationships with customers and interacting with customers. And so I have 3 stories from 3 different founders. And the big thing that I saw in all of these were empathy and human touch are really important for brands to be able to build one-on-one relationships with customers. But you're saying, hey, Vince, this is a session about AI and scaling support. So what does empathy and human touch have to do with AI? And what we've seen is that stores, before they pass the 20 million mark, what gets them to 20 million is really this one-on-one human touch and being able to build rapport with customers and really take care of customers. So 3 different stories for you. First one is Rachel Cohen, co-founder and CEO of a brand called Snow Home. They have really, really awesome home decor and furniture. And in the early days when I said, hey, what really makes a difference with Snow Home and what really made your first thousands of customers evangelists and really want to support your brand? She told me a story on the podcast about how she and her team were really personally invested in their customers, oftentimes where escalations would reach her, and customers did have in the early days her direct email address. And she told me a story about a time where she was buying a holiday gift, and the family, because of a personal circumstance, had to open up gifts that holiday season earlier, like before December 25th earlier. And so even with the shipping cutoff times, it wasn't possible for their package to make it there. And she and the team ended up sending personal notes to the wife of this husband, basically explaining at great lengths how her husband really tried to go above and beyond to be able to make it the perfect holiday for them. And, you know, it included things like saying, if I could be there myself, if I could hand deliver this to you myself, I would. And these are the types of things that end up being challenging to scale in a template or in a macro or with AI today. But these are the stories that have really resonated around this brand as it took off. So another one, Eunice Bion is the CEO and co-founder of a company called Material. And Material, their early customers, Eunice actually had interactions on a personal cell phone level, like they could reach out via cell phone. And one of her earliest customers called her for advice. And to this day, that same customer still calls for advice on kitchen decor. And as the company has expanded out to different product categories, that customer has made a purchase in every single one of the product categories that they've launched, but it's also given them really good insights early on being able to really understand what products are working with customers, what products are not working with customers, and how to get the insights to be able to actually increase conversion rate. Because as Eunice and many others and many of you are facing, when you launch that new product page, you might not always know what questions are unanswered or what things on that page need to be changed in order to close sales. And so having these unscalable, quote unquote, unscalable interactions with customers really allows you to know, oh, customers are interested in understanding what materials this product is made out of, or I'm giving this as a gift and my product page just didn't really make it clear what day this product could actually be delivered. And so when those customers are reaching out, asking those unscalable questions, it helps you get those into your page as well. Stephen Kuhl, who's the co-founder and CEO of Burrow, one of my favorite podcast guests that we've had on the podcast. And thanks, Derek, for sending out the link to the podcast. Appreciate it in the comments in the chat. So I asked Stephen, hey, tell me about one of your first customers. And he actually said that he had a customer that was shopping on that tight deadline. So it was that scenario that I was talking about earlier. Product page didn't have a specific day when the customer knew that they could get the item in hand. And he's actually selling couches. So these are couches that are modular sofas. And so you can start with a love seat. You can expand it into a 3-section. You can add an ottoman later on onto it. You can add a chase onto it. And the customer was hosting a party and wanted the couch there in time for a party. And instead of saying no, Stephen actually flew to where they were manufacturing the couches in Mexico City. A lot of them are made in the US now, but at the time they were manufacturing them in Mexico City. And he actually took the couches, checked it through airport security as part of his luggage, flew it back to New York, and delivered it to a customer via Uber XL. And this was a baffling story to me And you hear examples of this on and on and on and on again when stores are in the zero up to $10 million revenue range. One of my favorites is Urban Stems, of Jay Corey, also a podcast guest. With Urban Stems, their first orders were they were actually taking orders via email, going to Costco, purchasing a dozen roses, and then actually delivering that to customers. And now they've scaled it nationwide with a partnership with one-day delivery from FedEx. And it's a great way of being able to order flowers, and it's a huge disruptor. So here's the challenge. Your very first customer support team. The reality is the very first customer support team for all four of the brands that I just mentioned included the founders and included everybody in the company because they were developing the product. They were trying to make sure they had product market fit. And it was really, really important in those early days for every single customer that you interact with to be an evangelist and for you to take advantage of all of the dollars that you're putting into driving traffic to your store. Obviously, you want, in the long term, you want a scenario where you have high conversion rates and don't have to have a human touch on every single ticket. But in the early days, it's really important. So here's the structure that is typical of building out a customer service team in the early days. So one of the first things is the head of customer experience. So the head of customer experience is not necessarily a person, it's a role. And what I mean by that is in some instances, this could be the founder. In some instances, this actually is the head of e-com or the head of digital. In some instances, this is the CMO. In some instances, this is a customer service manager. But there has to be somebody who is taking a look at what the vision is for support, what the language that you want to use with customers is, what the tone you want to use with customers is, and how you want customers to interact with your brand. And you eventually get to the point where that person can't do all of the support themselves. And so your next person that you bring in is then a customer service lead or a customer service manager, which is really a person that's doing the customer service, but has more experience than just your typical customer service representative. So this is the person that's taking a look and configuring things like the flows that you saw in Gorgeous that Phil was demoing earlier. They're also taking a look at customer feedback, customer surveys. They're taking a look at things like your first response times, and they're improving those things. So it's a portion of the job is being able to interact with customers, and a portion of the job is building the structure that allows you to be able to start scaling with those number of interactions with customers as well. The pros of taking this approach is you keep and you maintain a really tight control over the voice of your brand and your interactions with your customers. One of the challenges or mistakes that we've seen many stores make is letting go too soon. So when you let go too soon and you hand this over to an Upworker or an independent contractor, oftentimes that person is really approaching support from a transactional standpoint. They're not looking at opportunities to upsell to increase AOV. They're not looking at long-term relationship to really drive LTV over the course of a couple years. And so that's where being able to keep a tight control over this is really, really important in the early days. It also helps you reinforce that your company is focused on high-touch standards for support. Now, the challenges, or when you know that this may not work anymore and you may need to look at other solutions, is if it becomes hard to scale during surges. So, for instance, there's a company out there that's makes really awesome products called Tipsy Elves, and most of their volume happens in Q4. And if you've ever seen the obnoxious but really awesome red suits for Christmas time, or they also have blue ones for Hanukkah as well. These suits with the ties are what Tipsy Elves sells, but they experience what is close to a 40 times surge during the holidays. So that's where this structure that you're seeing on the screen becomes challenging. And the same thing holds true for companies that have a product that sells a ton during Mother's Day. I'm sure brands like Chubbies, when I think Chubbies, I just instantly think 4th of July. And so for those brands that have high surge days, this is where it could be challenging. The other part is covering nights and weekends. It takes a team of 6 people on average to be able to cover 24/7. And we know that e-commerce happens around the clock. And so this can be a sign of growing pains as well. And then the last one is when you know that you're stretched too thin across all the customer service channels. So those channels, Phil showed them earlier. Email is a big part, the majority of the volume. Live chat, social, and voice are the other channels. But when you're having a hard time keeping track of all of those channels and keeping good response times in all of those channels, that's when it's a sign that this is something that you want to change from early customer service team building to starting to scale. So these are all the channels, and I won't go too deep on this because it was already covered in Phil's last session. But when you start seeing all of these channels come in, this is the time where it's time to start taking a look at moving your emails from, usually stores start with Gmail or they use Google Suite to be able to brand it as their own email. It's time to start taking a look at a system to be able to bring it in. And a ticketing system, there's a lot out there. Gorgeous is one of them that is making a ton of momentum in the Shopify ecosystem. And part of the strength there is the integrations into so many different other places. So those integrations like Facebook Messenger, those integrations like the chat widget that can be on your website, other integrations like reviews, whether you're using Yotpo or a different type of solution, is being able to bring that all in one place. The other systems to be able to take a look at is there's Zendesk, there's Intercom, there's a lot of different players here. And the important thing is getting one that is right for your business. And different businesses have different needs depending on the different channels that your customers are interacting with you in, depending on how much you want to have in a knowledge base, depending on how much automation you want to build, whether that automation is through email or through chat. And there's also different ways that these different systems survey as well. So after you have that system, you have your initial team in-house. Oftentimes, many different people in the company are involved in being able to answer those questions, whether it's the marketing team helping with social comments, whether it's a customer service person helping, whether you have your fulfillment person helping part-time with customer service. And in many of the instances that you saw earlier, the founders and the execs on many stores are involved for typically about the first 2 years of support. They still have a very day-to-day active role in support. So one question that we get asked a lot is different channels. So voice being one in particular, and the reason why so many brands are asking this is because voice is such an expensive channel to be able to run. On average, brands that staff a voice channel pay about $1 per minute, or sometimes even more than that, up to upwards of $2 per minute. So a 7-minute phone call is costing somewhere between $7 and $14 to be able to do. And the answer to this isn't straightforward. It really depends on your customers and what you're selling. Some brands, if your customers are baby boomers, you can see on this chart that over half of baby boomers still prefer phone and voice as a primary channel. On the opposite side of the spectrum, though, Gen Z and millennials, that percentage is the inverse, where over almost 90% of millennials prefer a digital channel. And those digital channels would be things like social, there would be things like SMS, and those would be things like live chat and email. And what the trend that we're increasingly seeing is that voice is becoming a channel for escalation. And so primary channels, customers for most brands are preferring digital channels like live chat, like email, and customers are really only asking for the ability to be able to switch to voice as an escalation if they're running into problems. And what's interesting is the stats around conversion rate. So we talked at the beginning of this talk about the goal here is to be able to take that traffic that's already on your website and get it to convert while that user or while that customer is still on your website. And you want to be able to drive engagement there instead of only in trying to engage with that customer for the first time in something like an abandoned cart sequence. And with live chat on a website, customers that interact with live chat are actually 3 times more likely to convert. And sometimes that's because there's a frequently asked question that isn't on the product page yet, or a customer, there is information on a product page and the customer just didn't see it. And so they still have that question. Or there's a variant of your product that the customer wishes was available, or they're just not sure if it's available and they couldn't find it on a different product page or in your collection page. And so being able to direct customers to those things and being able to make sure that they have the answers to those questions while they're still on your site and before they bounce is a really great way of being able to drive conversion. And different businesses have different ways of implementing that. And so 61% of businesses have actually implemented AI in 2017. This is up 38% from 2016. And I feel like 2017 was like the year of the Facebook Messenger, the year of the chat bot messenger, and tons of stores went out and did this. And there's many companies investing in AI. Be curious from those of you that are on in the chat, how many of you have an Alexa or a Google Home at home? If it's you, just type something into chat like me. What's the funniest thing that you've ever asked it? So I see Abby's got an Alexa or a Google Home at home. Derek's got one as well. William's going above and beyond. William's got both. This is, my son asks it, why do I have toes? I wish I had an Alexa around me just so I could figure out what the answer is there. And this is, so Adam's got the setup that I for sure love, which is the Sonos with Alexa, which was a game changer as soon as I set up that integration. Not the purpose of this talk, so I'll try to get back on track. Companies like Google and companies like Amazon have invested more in AI than any other company out there. And the reality is I love my Alexa. I wouldn't trade it for anything. Alexa works about half the time. And the other half of the time, I have to either ask my question again or I have to phrase it in a different way. And, one of the most challenging things about Alexa is you have to say things in the way that it's programmed. And so for me to be able to open my blinds in my bedroom, it's actually, Alexa, turn on open blinds. And so turn on open blinds is completely this unintuitive thing to say. And that's the challenge with the state of AI in e-commerce right now, is that there are definitely use cases where customers ask questions and the AI is perfect and shows an awesome response. And there's times where it's not, because we can't all train customers to magically say the exact same phrase that you need them to say, which in the blinds instance is turn on open blinds. There's no way that that's a natural thing to say. And so AI can definitely scale personalized one-on-one human relationships with customers, but only if it's applied the right way. Yeah. William says, I love when I say to Alexa, Alexa, turn off living lamp. There's no device called living lamp, or there's no, living light. So bots can give customers instant access to self-service content, but what's important is you have to hand off to a human in order to close those sales, because you can't risk leaving it entirely up to a bot. And I'm using the word entirely there, but there are things that bots can handle. So let's take a look at what those things are. If there's one thing that you take away from this talk, it's use the bots to automate everything and anything that you possibly can that has to do with post-sales support. That customer has already made a purchase, but there's also a limited number of things that customers ask about. Customers typically ask about order status, tracking status, defective products, exchanges, repairs. And there's less than 10 things for the most part, or 10 categories the customers are asking about. So this is Timbuktu, one of my favorite backpack companies. And I know they sell many, many other things, but I have one of their backpacks. They're using Gorgeous on here. The same types of features exist in Zendesk and Intercom and the others. And I thought Phil did a great job of showing the complex decision tree that you can build in the tool. And here's an example of what that automation can do. If I go on to Timbuktu and I just type warranty info, it can grab the words warranty, and from there it can display this this message back. And what I love about the end of this message is, if this isn't helpful, reply in this window and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. And so they put a path in here for the transition to human, or a transition to a person when the AI can't help. What's really important here is the difference between pre-sale and post-sale. For your pre-sale messages, you might not want to send it to a bot, because the goal there is to be able to drive an increased conversion. And so that may be worth spending the extra investment in making sure that goes to a person to be able to answer right away. So this is an example from Roma. So Roma on here, question is, hey there, thanks for reaching out to Roma Designer Jewelry. How can I help you? And then the customer question is, I'd like to buy a ring for my wife, Valentine's Day, and I want it to be a surprise, but I don't know what ring size she is. And this is not as simple as warranty support, but there's also a lot of pre-sale keywords in here. I would like to buy, so the word buy is going to be indicate pre-sale, and the words return, warranty, exchange, order, status, tracking are not in here, so it's more likely to be a question about pre-sale. And there's nuances in here that AI isn't great enough, good enough to be able to solve for today yet, which is, you have to know that Valentine's Day is a holiday. You have to know that people buy gifts for other people, and that oftentimes those are a surprise. And the challenge is, most companies, if they were trying to automate something like this, ring size would have just triggered a link to the sizing chart. And a link to the sizing chart wouldn't solve this customer's problem. And so the solution here was a response back that just said, hey, that's a great question. I would recommend printing out this ring sizing chart and then take one of her other rings, and without her knowing, put it on the paper, and you'll be able to tell what size her other rings are. And so this is an example of, more than likely, without a response through this live chat, this customer would have bounced. With a response through this live chat and being able to answer it quickly, this is where that chart that was shown earlier on the percentage of tickets that are converting versus not converting, this is how you drive that number up. The other interesting part here is when you're staffing it. And so most stores staff support Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, during business hours in that company's local time. The problem with in that company's local time is, if you are on the West Coast, or if you're on the East Coast, you likely have customers on the other coast. And so in some instances, that ends up with support not being staffed anymore at 2 p.m. in a business day, because at 5 p.m., the folks on the other coast have already gone home. But if you were running a brick and mortar boutique, or you were running a brick and mortar shop, there's no way that you wouldn't staff your store during your busiest times. And so this is so Derek just threw into the chat, this is probably the biggest mistake that you can make in e-commerce customer service, staffing literally the exact wrong hours. And I 100% agree with that. In some instances, as we've done a deep dive of Google Analytics traffic on a store, and then taking a look at conversion rates by hour interval, in some instances, it's actually better to staff customer service from 1 p.m. in the afternoon to 9 p.m. at night than it is to be able to do 9 to 5, because that's where a majority of shopping is happening. All of us today, it's 12 o'clock right now, at least in Central Time Zone where I am, we're at work and we're working on this, not shopping, unless you're shopping on your phone right now while watching this. But online shopping prime time happens at 8 p.m. So Matt Books says, we see missed calls after hours and weekends, but how do you cover the cost? So that's a great question, and that's something that we can deep dive a bit into. So I mentioned earlier, staffing nights and weekends is challenging to do. So folks like Matt, Matt, how many people do you have focused on customer service today? Folks like Matt, when you're scaling support to be able to cover nights and weekends and 24/7, it takes 5 to 6 people working 8-hour shifts. And that doesn't even account for folks going on vacation. That doesn't account for folks getting sick. So Matt today has 1.5 people focused on support, 1 dedicated sales rep, and 0.5 of Matt. And so this is common. So in this instance, Matt would be that head of customer experience wearing many, many hats. And then you have 1 full-time dedicated sales rep. And Matt, what hours do you have that sales rep working today? So one way of being able to do this is to augment support. Augment support meaning take a look at a hybrid model. So an example of a hybrid model would be having somebody available during business hours for all types of questions, and then augmenting support with a third party during times where your person or your employee isn't necessarily available. And those are the times for your pre-sale questions, especially, you want somebody who can answer those basic questions that customers have to be able to close the sale right away. And the challenging part is if Matt were to hire an extra employee and pay them, I'm going to throw a number out, $13 an hour for Saturday or Sunday, for that Saturday or Sunday, you'd end up paying over $200. You'd end up paying $200 just for 8 hours of staffing on Saturday and 8 hours of staffing on Sunday. So this is where solutions like Simplr come in. So I haven't talked about Simplr at all, but Simplr is basically customer service staffing on demand. And so what Simplr does is we can actually augment those hours. And so for your pre-sale questions, we use a network of humans, US based humans all over the US. And we give folks like Matt access to these on-demand humans, and we can staff all of those intervals that aren't staffed today. And it goes back to the screenshot that I took during Phil's chat that I love is conversion rate. 11% of the folks that are in these pre-sale tickets are converting. And we've seen that by staffing nights and weekends, there's many times where you can actually increase this conversion rate from 11% up to 25%. So Happiest Baby, which is one of Simplr's clients today, we find that 1 out of every 4 people who chat into their chat end up making a purchase. And so you can drive this conversion rate up. But Happiest Baby, their team works for the most part business hours, and they do have some folks who work other hours, but those nights and weekend staffing is really, really critical because that's where your web traffic is. And the biggest piece with Simplr's model is you're not paying when you don't have a message come in. And so you're only paying every time that Simplr resolves one of these chats and is helping you get a sale. And during times where nobody's on your website or you don't have anybody who's chatting in on your website, you're not paying for a person to sit around and be able to wait for that ticket while you're paying for somebody. And then for your post-sale questions or things related to returns and exchanges, that's where Matt's dedicated sales rep or support rep who works at 9 to 5 Eastern can grab all of those more complex questions during other times. So I know I'm at the end of my time, and we got an exciting chat with Jimmy Kim coming up. And so here's my gift for you and a gift for your customers. If you want to try out this 24/7 US-based customer service on demand, Derek just put in the chat, it's the Uber for customer service. I'm a big Uber fan, but I prefer the Lyft of customer service. We're friendly folks. We're friendly folks, and we're there for you on demand. But if you need help with covering these different hours, there's no contracts, there's no minimums. You can turn it on and off anytime, and it literally takes just 48 hours to get up and running. It works already with Zendesk, with Intercom, with Gorgeous, whatever you're using for your ticketing systems. And there's the URL on the screen to be able to get 7 days for free. Just like everybody else, feel free to email me at vincent@simpler.ai. Or you can just tag me in a message with a hashtag for this conference, and that hashtag is ScaleEcom19. Thanks so much, and Derek, back over to you.
Thank you, Vincent. I love it. And yes, I think the first and biggest takeaway is making sure that your customer service team is covering your peak hours and not your traditional business hours.